So, listen to this. I don't think there has been a single player who's been as mistreated by his own club over the past few years as Raphinha. And I'm not even talking about the Ballon d'Or situation. I mean, I'm talking about that too, but hold your horses. All the way back in 2024, way before all that, he was going through one of the toughest seasons of his life. He got injured, spent 28 days on the sidelines, got benched by a 17-year-old, and just as he was about to make it back onto the team, he got injured for another 30 days and lost his place for good, being moved all the way across the pitch to make up space for Yamal, and still, somehow, not only was he consistently the best on the pitch throughout the Champions League's knockout stage, but as the season ended, he had scored or assisted at a higher rate than anyone in the team, and I don't mean by a little, he was doing it 24% more than second best Robert Lewandowski, getting within inches of a goal contribution per 90. Yet, as the market opened, even though he had outright rejected a millionaire offer from Saudi, hoping to build upon his momentum, Nico Williams played a couple good games at the Euros, and suddenly, Barcelona were turning their backs on him with his own supposed fans daydreaming about his departure. Raphinha had become the ugly duckling of the Camp Nou. They were all ready to hand off his number to some other guy, ready to give up on a man who would put down 61 goal contributions over the following year. And I mean, why? Well, to begin with, this sort of differential treatment isn't anything new. Just ask any Brazilian player who's ever stepped foot there. Ronaldo Phenomenon himself claimed, "We were all treated badly. Barca's always had problems with Brazilian players." Romário was done with them after a season and a half, going back to Brazil in search of happiness. And as for Ronaldinho and Neymar, well, one left after being deemed a bad influence on the club's youngsters, and the other because he felt he'd never get the same opportunities as the players who had come up through the club's hierarchy. That's the thing, you see. It's not about their nationality. If there's one thing Barcelona are obsessed with, it's their own academy. And though I can certainly understand why, at the end of the day, Raphinha couldn't be any more different from the kids at La Masia. Look, while Yamal was getting bathed by Messi himself as a baby, Raphinha was born in the favelas of Restinga, almost 800 miles away from Rio, where there are only two ways out, Grêmio and Internacional. But Raphinha, he got rejected from both. In fact, he also got thrown off his local team because he was repeatedly skipping school to play, and even once he found a team that would actually take him, their grounds were too far away for him to walk, and he couldn't afford to take the bus either, so he ended up leaving them as well. And eventually, he just ended up playing at the Várzea, or as he calls it, the home of the rejects. Listen, foreigners will hear Brazilians talk about it and assume it's just like the Sunday League, but it's not. As Raphinha explained, it's like the wild west out there. Any player can turn up, you're playing the burning heat on clay, dust and sand with a ball some guy brought from home. The goals have no nets, just posts, and babes, forget about it. One team just plays shirtless. They all play with this anger. I would get death threats. They would smash in the locker room's door and tell us, if you win this game, we'll kill ya. You'd be about to score and a random gunshot would go off. If you can play in those games, you can play anywhere. A big European final, don't care. A stadium with 90,000 people, bring it on. But unfortunately, that just wasn't gonna happen. While Yamal was playing Champions League football at 16, at that same age, Raphinha had only just joined his first academy, moving all the way out to São Paulo after an agent promised him a spot at his tiny club named Audaz. But even there, they hated him. As his father told it, once he sprained his ankle so bad, it was the size of his knee, but his coach kept shrugging it off. He straight up told the kid, "That's nothing serious. Go back to your hometown. You shouldn't even be here taking the spots from our local boys." Yeah, as you may have guessed, eventually he did just leave that club as well, and after considering the idea of quitting for good and becoming a barber's apprentice, he joined one final club called Imbituba to play in the second division of the Under-20 State Championship of Santa Catarina, now only 200 miles away from home. However, soon, he did get a jump up to Avaí, one of the biggest clubs in the state, and though there, he struggled enough that at one point he was told he wasn't needed and should start practicing on his own. He somehow made it back, as he always seems to, and in 2016, at 19 years of age, he played just well enough at the Copinha, the most prestigious youth tournament in Brazil, that, among the stands, he was noticed by none other than Deco. and with him by his side, everything changed. Suddenly, before he'd even made his professional debut, he was moving to Europe, joining Vitória de Guimarães in Portugal for 600,000 euros, and after a few months training with their B team, he played his first professional season at 20 years old, shocking everyone by averaging almost a goal contribution per 90 over the first half of the season, before slowing down, but coming back just in time to grab an assist in the final of the Portuguese Cup and leave them within inches of their second ever major trophy. After that, everyone at the club knew it was time to double down, and what they got back was 20 goal contributions in the league alone, only fewer than the respective strikers of the Big Three. It was such an unbelievable performance that back in 2022, the club named him in their all-time best 11. Meanwhile, since things could never come easy for Raphinha before the market even opened, the one club who came for him was precisely Sporting, who in between negotiations would see their own ultras invade their training grounds and attack their own players, leading not only to the resignation of their club president, who had allegedly orchestrated the whole thing, but to the departure of most of their star players, as well as that of Jorge Jesus, the manager who had asked for his signing. Yeah, those years back at the Várzea would surely come in handy now. Regardless, things at Sporting wouldn't last too long. After one of the worst injuries of his career led him to miss most of the first half of the season, he came back to take both domestic cup titles while leading Sporting on a 14-match unbeaten streak. So, when Hans showed up with a 21 million euro offer 2 hours before the market closed, with Sporting desperate for money and knowing this was much higher than what any other club had been willing to pay, they simply had to take it. However, I'm sorry to say, things weren't too different at Rennes. Even though he arrived as their all-time record signing and certainly impressed, at one point scoring a brace with a 97th minute winning goal against their rivals FC Nantes, all on his way to a third-place finish that would qualify the club to the Champions League for the first time ever. Well, meanwhile in England, Bielsa and Leeds head scout Victor Horta realized in conversation they both had Raphinha as their dream signing, so they decided to give it a shot, thinking it was wildly unrealistic, and were shocked to see as Rennes asked for only 18 million euros, even lower than what they had just paid for him themselves, as apparently the new board that had just taken over the club considered the previous one had overpaid. Which, let me tell you, the fans did not seem to agree with, taking it over to Twitter to insult the Leeds fans as much as they could, only to watch the transfer go through, only a day after Raphinha scored, took man of the match, and almost banged in a bicycle kick in his final match for their club. Still, even with Bielsa insisting that despite having just traded the Champions League club for one that had just recently gotten promoted, not even Raphinha had an open door into his starting 11. A month later, on his first start, he took the Man of the Match award against Arsenal and, in a flash, he was being labelled as priceless. As Bielsa himself admitted that he felt there was nothing he could teach him, yet, as he led them to 3 consecutive Premier League wins for the first time in 18 years, Fernandinho showed up out of nowhere to ruin his season. In fact, still used to the Várzea days where you'd put some ice on it and carry on, Raphinha told Bielsa he would be good in 2 to 3 days, only to end up in the emergency room later that day with internal bleeding. It was so bad he needed surgery and not even that really fixed it. Raphinha ended up being rushed back 4 times before he finally felt better, enough that he'd watch as Leeds failed to win any of the 3 matches he missed, meaning that even though he himself finished the season on a 7-match winning streak, they still fell 3 points short of a miraculous European qualification. However, it wasn't all bad, because now, already approaching his 25th birthday, just as he got extremely close to switching his allegiance to Italy, as he began accepting Brazil didn't even know who he was, since the few people who did only saw him as some random who never made it in Brazil and had played in small-time European clubs all his life. Then, he started the following season with a screamer against Everton, and a call-up arrived out of nowhere. And though he stayed on the bench for all 3 games, 2 months later he got called back, assisted 2 and won a penalty on his debut, then scored 2 himself the following game before taking an overnight jet so he could play for Leeds the next day, as with the club crashing down the table, he had been directly responsible for 8 out of the measly 16 points they had won by New Year's. All season, it became insanely obvious that Leeds simply could not survive without him, so much so that with interest growing crying as he almost took the league's Player of the Month in February, despite Leeds not winning a single game all month, leading to Bielsa's sacking. The contract negotiations stalled. But even then, with Barcelona ready to extort Leeds as they knew relegation would see his release clause drop down to £25 million, Raphinha was simply too loyal to his fans and showed up on the final match day no matter what, scoring to save them from going down, jumping into the stands to celebrate with the fans, and then fulfilling his promise to God that he would walk the whole pitch on his knees if they survived. Still, after forcing Barcelona to fork out his full transfer fee, from the day of his presentation there were massive, glaring hints at the way they were about to treat him. I mean, come on, he couldn't even take that usual photo where the player shows off his new shirt number, because he didn't have one. They were so broke, they couldn't register him until they offloaded some players to bring down their wage bill. So broke, they had to mortgage their future broadcast revenue in order to afford his €65 million price tag. So broke, even the league's own president was roasting them. And that's the thing, it was all bound to go wrong at some point because, like many of their transfers at the time, it was all done on a whim with not much forethought behind it, and you were left to think whether Barcelona ever really wanted him or if he was just a player they felt they could get. Yeah. Raphinha was, ironically, signed with a replacement of the struggling Dembele, except that, at the time, Dembele's form had already been on the come-up since the last months of the previous season, so, of course, it kept improving, leaving Raphinha glued to the bench, while everyone who had been paying any attention just felt like yelling, "I told you so," since every newspaper had already been writing that they didn't need another right-winger. But what did Barcelona care? In a flash, the fans were already coming after him so hard that Xavi himself was forced to come out and defend him. But what did that matter if even after Dembele went out injured, giving Raphinha the space to come off the World Cup break with 10 goal contributions in 12 games, saving them in a moment when Lewandowski's form was down as well? They went out to play Man United, and he was the one that Xavi subbed off, even though he had scored one of their goals and assisted the other. And if the moment the season was over, even though he had been averaging a goal contribution every 110 minutes, he was the one put on the chopping block the moment they needed the money to bring Messi back. Yeah, that might have actually happened if it wasn't for Inter Miami. Come on, I definitely get the excitement, it's goddamn Lionel Messi, but from a sporting perspective, there's no way that could make any sense. Still, just like that, we're back at the beginning of the video. Despite getting injured repeatedly, benched and moved out of position for a 17-year-old, Raphinha still held on to his momentum like his career depended on it. Maybe because it did, and closed out his season with a ridiculous 21 goal contributions in the game time equivalent of about 21 games, not just outperforming all of his teammates there, but putting up the most outrageous scouting report in La Liga before going out to the Copa America and becoming the only Brazilian player to make it to the team of the tournament, while on top of all that, rejecting the kind of money from Saudi that would make the most loyal of players fold like a lawn chair. All so that his own supposed fans did the exact opposite, turning their backs on him after one good tournament by Nico Williams, even being told by his old agent Deco, now working for Barcelona, that he should look for a new team. Though in Raphinha's own words, "Seeing people parade my shirt with another player's name certainly hurt, made me feel disrespected, but it was a special reason to make sure that if I was giving 100% before, now I should give 200. And thankfully for him, the introduction of Hansi Flick not only led to a complete change of plans, now going as far as naming him as one of the team captains alongside Ter Stegen, making it the first time in 20 years that the captain wasn't a La Masia player, but also changing up the tactics completely, employing a pressing system that Raphinha had been hardwired by Bielsa to fit perfectly, bringing him closer to the center of the pitch, and watching as by October he was smacking Bayern with a hat-trick while wearing the armband, and getting every newspaper to write think pieces trying to justify his jump in performance because, after all, look at the charts. Or, I guess, look off the charts. By the end of the season, no Brazilian player had ever scored as many El Clasico goals in a single year. And I mean, look at the competition. In fact, with 61 goal contributions, he had surpassed Neymar's best ever tally. And as Barcelona won La Liga, there was no doubt who the MVP was. And yet, as he topped the betting house's rankings for the Ballon d'Or, having added to that Bayern hat-trick 2 goals and 2 assists against Dortmund, as well as 5 goals and 1 assist against Benfica, demolishing every team in sight. Once he assisted the equalizer in the first leg against Inter and scored the 88th-minute goal in the second leg that everyone assumed would put him in the final, matching Ronaldo's record for the most goal contributions in a single Champions League season. Inter miraculously turned it around, and then, mysteriously, Raphinha slipped down the Ballon d'Or's rankings at record speeds, ending up in an inexplainable 5th place, while Yamal rocketed up to 2nd. And as the few football fans who actually seemed to be paying attention looked for answers, they found that while Raphinha did nothing but praise his teammate for his achievements, no matter how much it may have hurt, he didn't get the same treatment. Instead, watching as Yamal's father put up one tantrum after the other, with Romain Molina eventually exposing that it was precisely he who, filling the club, was giving Raphinha's run for the Ballon d'Or more support than they were giving his sons, which is insane in itself, made an ultimatum to both the club and the Spanish Federation so that they would change that. Yeah, I guess in the end, they really weren't more than a club.